in some ways, this era in 2027, it's definitely more post-racial than whatever 2009 was for us. First of all, the refugees that are coming in and that are being targeted for murder and whatever else, they're not like in some kind
Not
of
strictly
like
brown.
they're not in some kind of brown white hierarchy, right? It's post-racial in the sense that the real hierarchy is native born versus not native born, which we're seeing in America now. Like I don't know if that's necessarily going to last, but I also see a situation in the future where the global South, whether it's climate change or something else, right? They are just going to be kind of itching to get into the northern hemisphere. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Artifact 66. I am wearing the same shirt that I'm wearing from Artifact 65, and so is Keith because we are just recording these back to back. And we are going to be discussing the 2006 film Children of Men. I saw it for the first time only late, not even last year. Actually, it was in January because it was in Criterion. And I mean, there's a lot to say about the film, both politically as well as artistically. Especially now, like with everything that's going on in terms of ICE and Trumpism, and the fact that the film takes place in 2027. We are in 26. I think it actually treats this kind of futurism very well compared to most sci-fi films. So we're going to get into it. And just quickly, by way of introduction, my name is Alex Sheremet. I am an author and filmmaker. My first film was From There to There, Bruce Ario, the Minneapolis Poet, which I co-directed with Joe Parrish. I'm now working on films number 2 and 3. You could watch the first film if you would like to at patreon.com/automachination. I have it there in streaming, and I'll have it on other platforms in the near future. So I guess I'm back to discussing film now because I used to write film. I wrote a book on Woody Allen, and I used to do a bunch of reviews. But now, since I'm a filmmaker, I do view films a little bit differently, and I think I appreciate this film, especially now after becoming a filmmaker. It might technically be one of the greatest technical films ever made, I think. Everything in that regard goes together very well. So we'll talk about all this. And so, Keith, what do you think? Do you agree with this kind of top-down assessment of the film that maybe it's not great in the normal way they would use the term, but technically speaking, it has to be way up there in terms of technical greatness?
Um, I would say because I saw this movie back, I didn't see it in 2006 when it came out, but I probably saw it in 2008, 2009, somewhere thereabouts. That was just when I was getting to movies, and I was very impressed with it at the time. Having seen it a long time ago and remembering its like really good technical qualities, watching it this time just as uh I guess more reacquainting myself with the narrative and the aesthetic. I was again impressed by the aesthetic, but I think you might be overstating like the overall qualitative impact of things because aesthetically and socially, I think the film is, pretty impeccable, I would say. Other than like maybe its estimation of what technology would look like, although it's a different world that it's depicting, so you can't expect it to be like one to one. I mean, socially, I think it pretty much nails its assessment of like what the situation of a zero birth rate across the entire planet would probably end up looking like. Probably very generous in its assessment that Britain would be the place that wouldn't go crazy, but that you
No,
couldn't know that.
I was going to ask why you think that is. Is it just because of the fact that it's an island, or is there something else going on? Because it's a bit of an odd choice.
Well, I in their head, I'm sure it was something like Britain has a pretty history of a pretty strong central state, and it's relatively small, so you probably could project power over it easier than a lot of other places. Although I think in one of the montages it suggests that Japan also went to shit, and I feel like Japan probably could handle this situation pretty good because they already have kind of been dealing with a minor microscope, a miniature version of it since like the 90s with some of the birth rate stuff over there. Um, and also it might just be, I mean, they are first of all going off of a novel which had made certain choices. I don't know if the novel takes place in England like this did, but if it did, that could be one explanation. Could also be this is the place that, because as far as I know, when they started casting it, they didn't even have a finished script. Like I was reading something that said that Clive Owen told them like, yeah, I don't really get it exactly, but I'm kind of into the vibe, so I'll sign on to this. But anyway, what I was saying is, I think like its judgment socially as to kind of what how this would shake out is pretty correct, which is intensified government control and basically within the framework of like liberal capitalism, like extreme rationing to a select group of citizens and like ruthless treatment of refugee populations that would flock to the places that are like handling it relatively better than others. And aesthetically, there's several things in this movie, several shots in this movie that are extremely impressive. And it's actually, I think, clever in the way that it does like it makes it feel kind of bigger than it is in terms of like number of sets and things like that. But I would say the story is relative, especially watching it now where I don't have like the aesthetic part of it doesn't hit me as hard because I experienced it over 15 years ago. And I kind of knew to look for that going in. I would say the story is pretty stock
Hmm.
for the most part. I would
Hmm.
say it's not an especially deep story, and in fact there's several aspects of it that are either are just cliche or are kind of verging on cliche. At the very least, it's more archetype than really fleshed out and nuanced. So I would say my overall assessment of it's probably lower than what you're depicting, but it's definitely a solid movie. I mean, especially in the under the aegis of like Hollywood, you wish that kind of this was the standard for like the minimum standard instead of what the minimum standard actually is.
Yeah, well, my comments specifically, I was when I said technical greatness, I
Yes.
am specifically referring to some of the things he described, the very impressive shots. You said that it's like very pristine aesthetically, right? And that's very specific, right? We're not saying artistically, we're saying aesthetically. Um, the difference being, of course, is that all right for artistic greatness. I was having recently a conversation about this movie in the last few weeks, and I said something along the lines of, for a kind of like sci-fi, I guess you could call this like post-apocalyptic film. I would always look at the Matheson novel, I Am Legend, for how to handle some of the stuff because you really do need to avoid like what you mentioned. Okay, so like the storyline is like fairly stock, right? It's kind of just let's just call it idiomatic, even if we don't want to say like the word cliched. It just kind of follows a rote sort of thing that you would expect from a sci-fi film, sci-fi story. With a book, though, I'm specifically not talking about film, but the book I Am Legend. The focus is it is this kind of setting, right? It is you could call it sci-fi, but the difference being is that there's a hyper focus on the internal psychology of the protagonist, the kinds of situations that he's put into, and how he responds to them internally. It captures character very, very well. And I think the biggest shortcoming of this film, I think I could even get over maybe some of the roteness of the plot, but the primary shortcoming is in the fact that the characters are just mostly there to push along the plot. And they do so well, like it is well acted, and that sort of thing is done skillfully. But it is much more so along the lines of like, okay, uh, there's a there's a brutality to the film that although there isn't a whole lot of gore, I mean, there's like a couple of gory scenes, but for the most part, what we get is just the kind of shock, and it's not shock value in the sense of like horror. It's shock. It's shock in the sense of like you don't expect, for example, his estranged wife after their interaction with whatever it was, that little ball back and forth and just sort of getting to know one another. You don't expect her to like die off that quickly and that brutally, but you get that. The civil war that emerges, it's very, very realistic in the sense that you could see exactly how people in that situation. This is exactly the kind of danger that they're in. The stakes are very high. People don't just live because like it would just be, somehow plot-wise pat, right? They die, and even when they don't necessarily die, there's this kind of just viciousness of like, well, this is what this regime will look like. Like near the end of the film, there's this really evocative sequence that I think really sticks in the mind, and I think it's one of the things that sticks most in my mind when the midwife Miriam. She kind of like gets up in this like refugee bus because she doesn't want the mother to be sacrificed essentially. So she kind of like makes a scene. She knows she's going to be taken off of the bus for that, and she'll be in danger. You don't see her get killed. You don't exactly know what happens to her, but she's just kind of taken out. She's forced to kneel down. A bag is placed over her head, and then the bus drives away. And although you got to know her a little bit, that's the last that you see of her. She's never mentioned again. And that's just kind of the brutal, everyday reality in this kind of situation that otherwise, viewers might be protected from. People just kind of flit in and out of consciousness, in and out of existence, in this kind of brutal world, and it's not very expected, and the shock value is not at all with regards to the gore. And those kinds of things are done very well. But again, there's never like a single character that is particularly rich. There's no situation that they're in that you're like, wow, like I know exactly what they're thinking. Like it's never like that. And in that regard, even if it's extremely well crafted and well executed, it would be closer to a more rote sci-fi film than something again like the Mason novel I Am Legend would ever be, despite being the same genre, right? One is high art, high literature. This is very well crafted art, but with those set of limitations that I just described.
Yeah, and even then there's certain things that are like that's good world building, but not necessarily great art, like the
Hmm.
scene you were just describing where the midwife gets dragged off the bus and like yeah, and you're right that you never see her again, but on the one hand, it's probably not unrealistic that there would be like bodies being stacked, in
Hmm.
view of the bus, because the whole point of the exercise is basically to scare the refugees into subservience, like once they're dropped off and like, look,
Hmm.
this is what the government will do to you if you fuck around, But on the other hand, the punch of like you never see this character again, is sort of unlike when you see that, oh no, they are just going to kill there's not any kind of like complex psychological thing happening. It's not like, they're taking them and interrogating them or something like
Hmm.
that. Like they're just, it takes a little bit of the punch out of it in terms of like I would say in some ways, like the art of art is like the art of ambiguity, is
Hmm.
like finding those moments where you cannot explain something and leave it up to the viewer's imagination. So on the one hand, that's probably not unrealistic that that would be a mechanism of social control in this really zero-sum world falling apart
Hmm.
environment that everybody inhabits. But on the other hand, just in terms of its impact on the art, it undercuts the like that sense of what you were describing. But I would say, are any of the characters? I would say the character of Key is almost kind of memorable to me, the way that
Hmm.
she has this kind of like sarcastic demeanor to her, this very like cynical sense of like there's one person that I trusted and she's died in the, her third scene in the film or whatever, and now I'm not really sure where, exactly what I'm going, what I'm going to do or what set of actions I'm going to take. So she almost kind of cohered as a character. And then I don't know, maybe Michael Caine's character is kind of memorable. I mean, I certainly remembered like visually his character, Michael
Hmm.
Caine with the long hippie hair and
But
the
I think partly because if Michael Caine, this is not a character you'd necessarily associate with him. So,
yeah, I mean, it
it's in
might be
that
focusing on
regard.
that a little bit, but
Yeah.
his character is not, the way he's like a little bit because he was like I think it said he was like a newspaper
Hmm.
satirist comic or something like
Hmm.
that. He was like involved in political stuff. So
He's kind of like a de facto, I guess, hippie, right? He would have been like a hippo back in the
he's a
day.
hippie, but he's a little bit posh because
Hmm.
to be in that kind of world, you have to be from a slightly elite background,
Yeah.
like you have to. He's older, so he could have come up when there was like still some possibility of being from a more working class background, but
Hmm.
he also has like a piece of property that he lives on. It's not super nice, but I mean
Hmm.
he has space, unlike most people that live in this world. He has kind of some nice audio equipment in his home. He has a little weed farm that where he grows weed in bulk. So it's like he's kind of an ambiguous character in terms of like what he is and what he represents. So
Hmm.
the fact that Michael Caine is plays him with a certain like stiff British poshness, but also like the hippie looseness and
Hmm.
the he's this kind of person, but maybe has this kind of background, and he has this catatonic woman that he's tasked with taking care of 24/7, and it's kind of a not like I say, he's not a super deep character, but I do have some memory of his character. Like I honestly forgot in the intervening 15 years that Clive Owen's character had like an alcohol problem.
Hmm.
That's not something that has stayed with me at all, but
Hmm.
the sort of weird stew that is the Jasper character has stayed with me a little, and that's kind of my when I haven't seen something in a while, that's kind of my metric is like what do I remember from it, if
Hmm.
anything? And that I do remember that. So that's
Hmm.
not bad.
Another top-down aspect here, I guess, to discuss is, um, even if we concede some of these critiques that we've made, another thing in terms of like, my artistic upbringing would be the belief that when it comes to maybe not even necessarily great art, but art that has something of substance to it, if it's prescient in some way, if it anticipates the future in some way, um, that is definitely a notch, right, on the pro side of the ledger for it.
Oh yeah, for
And,
sure.
and in this specific case, right, it does that very well. You mentioned, for example, the technology aspect where it's not handled. Maybe that will, but I don't know if I disagree, but I was kind of surprised how the majority of films, even when they're kind of like 20 years or whatever ahead. You could think of something like Terminator 1 and 2. Uh, their sense of, the passage of time and what you could expect in the future versus the present, it tends to be way, way faster than whatever transpires. I forget when Terminator 2, for example, is supposed to take place, but I think we're already well past that point, right? And nothing like it has come true. There's just like I guess like sci-fi films in general or sci-fi books, they tend to anticipate a much faster rate of progress than we get. Whereas here, maybe it's just the fact that, by the early 2000s, people already just kind of come to terms with like, okay, one thing we need to avoid now in sci-fi films is we need to avoid getting ahead of ourselves and making all these like super, pretentious predictions in terms of like whatever might be happening or what technology would look like, and just stick with, I guess more conservative estimates. And this is kind of like what they did. Like the technology here isn't really so out of bounds with what we have now, right? It's kind of similar to 2006 in the sense of like you have
Oh, I would say
compute.
it's below 2000. That's actually what I'm saying more so is like in some it's more like primitive technology than we had in 2006,
Yeah,
and that actually
I
makes sense to me in certain regards. I think the thing that stuck out to me is I
hmm
do think there were enough cell phones in 2006 that maybe they could have picked up on that, because in some ways the
hmm
technology here is almost like 1970s, and I think that's some of what they're trying to evoke with like the militant opposition groups is
hmm
like the IRA or various groups like that, and there is like a very 19 like there's newspapers everywhere,
hmm
there's like all the TVs are like tube televisions, there's like
well, for example, like the
TVs or
like
anything
like
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 that.
like the flat screen monitors for computers, they have a kind of like slightly futuristic vibe to them in terms of like I guess I'm just thinking of just in the office area where they're they're sitting at the desk, and there's almost kind of like some kind of like veins or whatever. I forget exactly what it looks like. So it's like not really so out of whack with what we have today. I agree about like some of the kind of more primitive aspects of technology, but that is also, as I was watching it again today, I was thinking like, well, it does make sense in a
Oh yeah, no,
world.
a lot of that stuff I agree. It makes perfect sense because
Yeah.
like you've seen that the rest of the world is like
Hmm.
going to shit,
Yeah.
and so there's no supply chains to like it makes sense that like all the cars are like slightly busted down, or
Hmm.
broken down, because you can't just rely on, oh, there's a part that's gonna arrive that was manufactured in
Hmm.
Singapore or Bangladesh or whatever
Yeah.
tomorrow. So that's like I say, I'm mostly supportive of this movie's take on it. I feel like if I'm in 2006 and I'm me an adult art, and I'm thinking through this, I think it would be like a weirder stew of like some like primitive breaking down shit and some the closest to that is when they're in the what is it, the Ark of the Arts or whatever. This guy's
Hmm.
building basically like a tomb for all the great artistic
Hmm.
achievements of mankind that he can get his hands on. And he has like a little, I don't know if it's supposed to be his son or his lover or just a
Yeah,
little
there's that kind of Neuralink
whatever.
cyborg type shit. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, well, specifically, he just has like a little iPad looking
Hmm.
thing, and he has like a little like haptic
Hmm.
gestural feedback thing. And so
Hmm.
I thought, and maybe that was the commentary they were making is like if there was this much of a crunch, then the really good future shit would be like 12 people would have access to
Hmm.
that,
Yeah.
just like the wealthiest. Then again, that's my complicated feelings on this movie is I feel like I would contrast it against something like the novel Infinite Jest,
Hmm.
which I think you could also look at and say, he really did have his finger on the pulse in terms of a lot of social and even political trends. The president that he depicts in that book is a germophobic lounge singer with, certain overtones of Michael Jackson, but I mean, many people have commented that he pretty much nailed like Trump becoming
Hmm.
president and just like, instantly, uh, you know, causing the devolution of, basic political order, and the, increasing prevalence of like entertainment technologies as like narcotizing technologies of social elites and things like that. But he wrote a completely shit and horrible and almost unreadable novel around it.
Hmm.
Whereas this, I would say it also similarly pretty much nails the social analysis, and it sort of it puts a really aesthetically well realized wrapper around it, but then like the center of the candy bar is like a passable,
Hmm.
bordering on cliche story, so
Hmm.
that's kind of the complex feelings that I have toward it.
And it's just more of this kind of like prescience of the film. So Obama is elected in 2008. He starts up the administration in 2009. You would get all these think pieces about post-racial America. In some ways, this era in 2027, it's definitely more post-racial than whatever 2009 was for us. First of all, the refugees that are coming in and that are being targeted for, for murder and whatever else, they are, they're not, they're not like in some kind
Not
of
strictly
like,
brown.
they're not in some kind of brown white hierarchy, right? If anything, sometimes you do hear like if you look at the subtitles, they would say like foreign language being spoken. Well, I know hearing some of it that sometimes Russian is being spoken, and that is that they're white, right? In that regard, you have people coming in that have like a bit of a kind of Roma type of look. It's kind of like it seems like there's like Southern Europe, kind of like Italy, maybe a little bit swarthier. Eastern
There's French
Europeans.
people too, because when the
Hmm.
uprising starts happening in the refugee camp, there's people. I think they're riding a bicycle or a motorcycle. I
Hmm.
can't remember, waving a French flag.
Yeah. Yeah, so the it's post-racial in the sense that the real hierarchy is native born versus not native born. And even in the sense of like, oh, if they take away this this woman's baby, And she, she has an accent, right? She's clearly not from the area. Maybe she's some sort of like African immigrant. They're not saying that they'll do anything. Like what they'll end up doing is like they would kill her and substitute the mother for like some sort of posh black lady from the UK, right? So there's like a class stratification, obviously, but it's not necessarily racial, right? It's class and it's an issue of native born versus not native born, which we're seeing in America now. Like I don't know if that's necessarily going to last, but I also see a situation in the future where the global South, whether it's climate change or something else, right? They are just going to be kind of itching to get into the northern hemisphere because the only places that will be I guess habitable in an easy way at least, right, would be the extreme south and then much of the north. You know,
Waiter's gonna be a rough place.
yeah, it's so I mean it gets that aspect pretty well, and of course by the time that it was being filmed and by the time that it came out, like I assume filming was 2005 through 2006, came out closer to the fall of 2006. So this was even before like Obama was on the horizon and before anybody would dare even talk about post-racial anything, and we sort of get some of this now already. I mean, did you notice anything about that?
Oh no, I agree. And I was actually wondering because I was not paying very close attention to British politics in 2006, but was there, or 2005, or whenever they were writing and filming this, because it's pretty common now for people in Britain to complain about people from former Warsaw Pact countries like coming over and
Hmm.
fucking things up. But was that a common talking point back then? Because I mean, it seems pretty well observed, like because Britain does have a different relationship to race than America does. It's
Hmm.
very, like, there is this sort of like, you're it like there is a way in which it's like both racial and civil at the same time. There's always
Hmm.
that classic dichotomy of like civic nationalism versus blood and soil nationalism. And
Hmm.
Britain has a bit of both, I think, because there is a sense like if you're from the island, that's kind of the qualification, but then there's also like the racial stuff kind of on
Hmm.
top of that. Like there's not racial stuff, but there's, we do remember being an empire, and part of the propaganda of that empire was like the commingling of races under this
Hmm.
one banner of the king or the queen or whoever. So, but because I know I read somewhere that there was like five drafts of this script and supposedly, or five contributors, and Clive Owen might have done some uncredited. So I was wondering
Hmm.
if maybe he was inserting stuff that he was seeing like in, burbling under like the English political scene at the time. And if he was the one that, because like Alfonso Cuaron, I don't think he would have had like a strong sense of that, given
Hmm.
his background. So I wondered where that element of like, oh, kind of like fuck the rest of Europe too, like England forever, like that's very, very well observed. And I wonder where it came from in the process.
Hmm. Um, yeah, I'm not exactly sure. Just as you were saying that, I was thinking Ethan Pinch would have been great for this fucking show. He would have been like very, very animated about this shit. Like I could just imagine some of the stuff. Actually, I don't even know what he would say, which is, I guess, part of the excitement of Ethan Pinch, who has again reduced himself to not answering emails. So hopefully, he's gonna shape up after watching this video. But so another aspect of the kind of like race element is. Uh, you notice how like near the end when this kind of like uprising is really getting underway, one of these guys bursts in and he sees he sees the baby for the first time. He's wearing a keffiyeh, and it's like, okay, what does the keffiyeh mean in that context exactly? I don't really suppose that Israel or Palestine is doing very well under this new regime, and it's almost as if like the keffiyeh becomes like an all-encompassing symbol of resistance, which already maybe it was like to a small degree. Um, like I guess like people that are like more in the know, right? They've been, if you look at like rappers or whatever, like Immoral Technique, like you'd see him with a keffiyeh like as late as like the as early as the late '90s, early 2000s, and that wasn't so common. It wasn't as universally kind of recognized as it is now. But you have that, and then when you have at some point you have a bunch of rebels marching through the street, and they're doing the Allahu Akbar chant, and they're dressed in clothes that are very reminiscent of Hamas, both the green headbands as well as
I noticed that as well.
and granted, I mean, 2006 is when, well, technically maybe they won the election in 2005. I don't remember if they won the election in 2005 and then the transition happened in 2006, or the election was 2006 and the transition soon after. But anyway, maybe, but it's not as if like even Hamas was like a universally seen, group in terms of their uniforms or whatever. I don't even know if that was even so formalized just yet. But
Well, I
yeah, I
don't think
mean, we
Hamas had like some kind of monopoly on, like a balaclava and then like a headband with Arabic writing on it or something. I mean, I don't think they started that
no,
aesthetic.
they no they
But
yeah they didn't. But uh I mean, like, you have all kinds of uniforms all over the Middle East, but of
yeah,
all the ones that I can sort of like think off the top of my head, it's the closest thing I can think of to
yeah,
Hamas,
no,
and
well,
it's
I mean, certainly this is right now a very difficult movie to watch,
hmm
like setting your knowledge of where things went aside.
hmm
It's very like that is kind of the intoxicating quality of the movie a little
hmm
bit. It's like all the little Easter eggs of like stuff buried in the background, little like details about the world or whatever, and then uh and it's like I say, you just wish there was like because I honestly don't think it would have taken that much to like find a slightly better. I mean, I guess the concept of there is a refuge, like this is a world, babies are not being born. England has basically chosen to close its borders and put refugees that show up on its shores in camps. And one of the refugees becomes pregnant, and a militant opposition group tries to shepherd them away from the government's control or whatever. Like, I think that's a
hmm
perfectly fine concept for a story. Uh, but then it's like, the grizzled former idealist with a drinking problem finds
hmm
a cause worthy of his attention and reclaims some of his youthful passion and idealism in service of that cause. You kind of found whatever,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it's so that's the because I remember because my I don't think my wife has seen this movie before, and she was like getting ready to go, and she was kind of picking it up, out of the corner of her eyes. She was getting ready, and she was mostly just like, this looks exactly like the world
hmm
that we live in. But
hmm
she just kept getting annoyed at the aspects of it that she just found to be more like Hollywood, or more
hmm
like tropey or whatever. And that was
hmm
like annoying her more than she was appreciating the prescience or whatever. So that's kind of that does make it a worthwhile thing to watch at the same time, to sort of try and
hmm
get in the you almost I actually wish there was like more than one story told in this world.
hmm
It sort of feels like it feels lived in enough that it feels like there is like interesting stuff happening that is not revolving around Clive Owen's character.
Yeah, I mean, it is very kind of it's more plot heavy as opposed to narrative heavy. And actually, this is I'm gonna have some quotes from Cuaron. Is that how you pronounce his name?
Cuaron, I think.
Cuaron. Okay, yes, he has some quotes relating to like narrative and film that we should pick apart. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely more plot driven than narrative driven in that regard. I will say though that one thing that's going for it is they don't in terms of dialogue, on the one hand there's not really having like just seen Eyes Wide Shut last night. I mean, there's so many like quotable lines and very good scripting, and there's nothing here that's super memorable in terms of the writing, but there's also not really a whole lot of like, there aren't really cliches in dialogue, right? There's just more so kind of like words that are uttered for the sake of pushing things along, which is and even like some small things I think could be pretty good, like um it's almost kind of like a self-conscious moment where uh as so they're sitting Theo and Julian, they're sitting in the bus together, they're waiting to get off a stop, and they get into an argument about something, and his estranged wife gets up as if she's about to like leave, and he's like, "Yeah, that's exactly what you always do. You just run like when things get hard." And that's a cliche, of course, right? That's a cliched statement in any kind of like romantic situation or whatever relationship. But as she's getting off, she was like, "This is our stop." Right. So it just undercuts the cliche. And there's like a few little moments like that. So the dialogue is never actually cliched, although, some of the specific tropes like you isolated, the grizzled alcoholic. But even so, I also forgot the fact that he's an alcoholic, although I saw this, movie only like a few weeks ago, because it's not really a major point of anything. I mean, somebody mentions it once or twice. You see him with a bottle a little bit, but it's not some sort of thing that's kind of like you're not being hit over the head with it again and again. So, I will say that the film manages to avoid some of these kinds of elements as well.
Hmm. Yeah, no, it's I agree that there's not necessarily cliches, although there are certain aspects that get like a little predictable at times, I guess. Like
Hmm.
I the first time you see it, you don't necessarily expect Julianne Moore's character to die that early on into the movie,
Hmm.
but once it happens, I do think there is kind of this like creeping sense that probably there is like some double cross that is going to happen with the group that she was with.
Hmm.
There is kind of that lingering lurking sense of like something's amiss here, something is not quite right. I mean, they don't signal it too hard, but if you're, a reasonably seasoned like movie watcher or narrative taker inner of, of any medium, you would probably pick up on stuff like that. So,
Hmm.
um, and then what did you think of the like religious aspect of the movie? Because there is
Yeah, I was about to
definitely
comment on that. Yeah.
yeah, there is definitely it's at times not so heavy-handed, and at other
Hmm.
times it's very heavy-handed. Like the scene in the I mean, probably the most obvious moment of this is the scene where they're in the barn where the cows are being
Hmm.
milked, and she reveals to him that she is
Hmm.
pregnant, and there's
Yeah.
definitely Christological
Hmm.
overtones to that
Yeah,
whole thing.
I think in terms of the symbolism, it might be the most overt one. But then again, I think there's a good enough level of undercutting it, such as, the scene begins with him like essentially talking about, uh, or rather, she begins talking about like the cow's tits. Why they cut off all the cow's tits? Why don't they just make machines to accommodate all eight tits? And she's kind of like crass about it, and it's not exactly a very logical shoe-in for religious kind of symbolism. There is a kind of like very modern adaptation for it in a way where it's not like biblical in the normal sense. So to me, I thought it was a nice set of moves there, and like the focus on the cows as opposed to anything else, and it didn't strike me as ham-fisted, particularly in that moment for these reasons. I can imagine it being that, but that's not to say that the symbol was like really like subtle and you wouldn't get it. But nonetheless, I think there's enough kind of touches where you could get away with it, and to me, it's a nice touch as opposed to a minus. And if anything, I think some of the critiques, if you look at some of the, I guess, like Christian reviews of the film, there's some people seemed like very upset that he's not dealing seriously with the source material, which is just much more religious. So a lot of that is just cut away, and there's almost something sacrilegious in a scene like that. You begin by discussing tits, and instead it's supposed to be a strangely religious moment. So I mean, that was my response to that specific scene. But what about other moments?
Let's see. Well, there is there's a funny conversation between Theo and Jasper
Hmm.
where I think there's like he says there's like the repenters and then the penitents or so. Basically, all these like apocalyptic religious cults have grown up around the crisis.
Hmm.
Basically, people just like doing some version of self-torture in order to make the babies come back or to appease
Hmm.
God or something like that. I mean, in general with that, and then also even with the what you mentioned of like the sort of it's not a humble manger with lambs and donkeys or whatever. It's like this big industrial barn where they are milking the cows and they mutilate the cows and things.
Hmm.
I mean, there is, I think, an intentional comment to sort of say like we are a deracinated people, we're a
Hmm.
spiritually denuded people. We don't really have a solid spiritual and emotional foundation on which to handle like a worldwide crisis like this,
Hmm.
and it will, we won't have the basis on which to address it in like a mature and rational way. So it'll just kind of the situation will just kind of slowly devolve and devolve and devolve until something horrible happens. And I mean that appears to be what's happening in real life with respect to climate change.
Hmm.
So I mean I can't fault the movie for taking that perspective. And then there is the scene, and I found this to be kind of a weak scene in the sense that it was nice to see these characters kind of bonding together, but I thought the dialogue was more on the heavy-handed side, where Key and the midwife and Theo end up at Michael Caine's Jasper's house, and Theo is making a drink in the other room, and he overhears Jasper telling them about Theo's son that had died. And
Hmm.
he's giving this thing like, well, it's all about faith versus chance, their faith and their politics brought them together to this rally, but it was chance that they met each other out of millions of people. And
Hmm.
it was their faith that caused them to make a baby, but it was their chance that took the baby away from them and blah. And I think a lot of that stuff is implied kind of by the rest of the movie, and I don't necessarily think it needed to be spelled out like that, but at the same time, it was kind of nice to see those characters just like shooting the breeze and talking about something that
Hmm.
wasn't just like what is the next point in the plot,
Yeah,
that
I
they're
I
moving
I I
through.
I, th I think if you took away some of the heavy-handedness and you just had more kind of bullshitting all throughout, it would, on the one hand, it would kind of emphasize the reality of like what this kind of existence would be. There would probably be like so many moments of banality, next to like explosive situations that happen here and there, here and there, here and there, and you'd get, like a richer sense of the characters. The fact that that wasn't done, I think, is definitely a negative for the film in that regard.
Yeah. That would, but a positive in that regard, though, something that I do think adds to it is near the beginning of the movie, there's the news story about baby Diego has died, and baby Diego is like
Hmm.
18 years old, and he's the last known child that
Hmm.
was born before the infertility epidemic just and killed all of the pregnancies that were happening. And there's all these like tearful, mournful stuff. There's like memorials you see on the street, like you
Hmm.
saw around George Floyd and other people that were killed in police conflict, or more recently, the Alex Preddy and Nicole Good. You saw little memorials and flowers and stuff, showing up on streets. But then Clive Owen is in the car, and he says to Jasper, like, everybody's sad about this kid. He was a wanker.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I
Jasper,
thought that was good.
yeah,
Yeah.
Jasper's like, yes, but he was the youngest wanker there is. And then you kind of remember back, and they say that basically, like, baby Diego, he got into like a petty fight outside of a bar or something like
Hmm.
that. I was almost put in mind of like Justin Bieber, this like
Hmm.
someone who was given global
Hmm.
fame much too young and turned into just like a totally like ill-functioning
Hmm.
neurotic who just like pathologically behaves badly.
And also in terms of this whole kind of world building aspect to it, I thought it was a very good detail. And I mean, like I felt the kind of like allure of the film very early on. I think most viewers would, starting with that, television announcement of the death of Diego, and uh, everybody seems like absolutely entranced, almost kind of like in a robotic fashion. And Theo is the only one that isn't, right? He's and that immediately just kind of like assuming you haven't seen the film before, you're watching that and you're just kind of thinking like, well, there's something kind of distinct about him. I know this is a sci-fi film. Are these people like not recognizably human in some way? Do they not have the predictable kind of emotions? Do they all kind of go in some kind of flow? And this kind of uh, it kind of presses on a bit when in the office he tells his manager, I guess, like, hey, like I've been like so affected by this death. Can I do my work at home? And the manager just kind of like looks at him, and you don't exactly know what's communicated in that look. You don't know if the manager also knows that he's bullshitting and he himself doesn't feel any kind of way either. And for a while, there's just this kind of sense of like, you don't exactly know fully who these people are and how different their behavior might be from our behavior, right? Because we're not in this kind of world. And whether Theo is like one of the only like normal people around. So like little, touches like that, I think are really good as well. Grant, like world building is like very overrated in terms of like, the finality of like artistic greatness. At the same time, as an allure, right? It definitely has
Hmm.
that aspect to it. And also like just another, I guess, like top down aspect that we could mention is uh, so more of this prescience. So like the conflict is one of infertility, and and another one is the so-called refugee crisis, and that is I mean I feel like these are the two main things that get discussed now, right? Like, and I don't know to what extent the whole kind of depopulation stuff that Musk often talks about, like I don't know to what extent it's just kind of engineered right-wing discussion on Twitter or whatever, versus how much it's like seriously being thought about or written about. Like I haven't really followed that question, but it seems like the two key issues that were identified in this 2006 film are the two key issues that are, I mean, like migration was a major thing in America for the 2000 for 2024 election. Migration is a huge thing in the UK, like all over Europe, and so is fertility. So what do you think about that as like beyond even the metaphorical aspects of it, which we're going to get into soon, but specifically like isolating those two and it being kind of like what we have now. Like what do you think about that?
I mean, I think if they had somehow gotten climate change in here, it would be pretty much a perfect,
Hmm.
although I guess maybe with the population ever decreasing, maybe that's,
Hmm.
implicit is like, hey, we solved the climate crisis. It's just by
Hmm.
decreasing the population steadily every
Hmm.
single year after a certain year. But no, I think that's the I didn't really hear the birth rates discussion until maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I think is kind of
Hmm.
when it really started breaking through. If anything, I would say the discussion, and maybe this is what they were reacting against artistically to an extent, was the discussion was always like overpopulation, like the
Hmm.
human population is always getting bigger. We're eventually going to like hit our carrying capacity, and there's going to be wars over resources and things like that, which is kind of also like we have a birth rate crisis and an overpopulation crisis at the same time, which is I mean, not true overpopulation, but overpopulation relative to the way of life that many people expect out of the planet. But maybe they were just like inverting, that and kind of seeing what would happen out of that. But it probably was not very hard to realize that difficulty absorbing new populations that enter into a territory is that's a pretty common thing throughout all of human history, really. I mean, you can see it as far back as like even earlier than the Roman Empire, like with
Hmm.
the freeing of the Jewish people from Babylonian captivity and their resettling back in Judea. They basically had to. I mean, if you look at some of the modern interpretations of Jewish texts, there is definitely a sense that it was like edited with a mind toward justifying sovereignty of the Jewish people over this particular parcel of land after the absence. I think they even call it like the what is it, the Babylonian redactor or something like that. I can't remember like what that term is, but Deuteronomic redactor. That's the like the Deuteronomic redactor, So that is a problem stretching back pretty much indefinitely. And so I guess my guess is they started with the premise, what if babies stopped happening? And then they thought, okay, well, what would that cause? And they said, horrible social breakdown everywhere, but we need a story, and the story probably has to be somewhere that is like relatively more stable. And if there was one place that was relatively more stable, then what would be happening there? They would have people flocking there, and that would be a problem. So
Mhm.
it's to some extent, I think it was really just thinking through like having like a big, in sci-fi you talk about like high concept versus low concept. So it's like taking a high concept idea and really thinking through it kind of systematically and seeing where that takes you.
Mhm. Before we get to some of these Alfonso Cuaron quotes, just a few things aesthetically and perhaps artistically that I really appreciated. Uh, Number one, in terms of like the color grade, I think they did a great job on it because it is simultaneously desaturated, um, but in a way where, and I mean, I've done this before in some of my photography. I mean, one of my favorite photos has this aspect to it where it's both desaturated but also it is modern and simultaneously like very kind of timeless. And I think the film definitely has this quality to it with the specifics of the color grade. I just thought it was very well chosen. Most of the camera work is handheld camera. It's so you see a little bit of the shakiness. You see it kind of like moving in and moving back. They did a really good job of keeping the focus exactly where it needs to be. And I mean, with that amount of motion and kind of going in and out, it's really nice. It allows for this kind of seamless transition that you have kind of like again and again between, kind of like subject and object. Sometimes, Theo is the subject, sometimes he's the object, and it's this kind of it's a seamless back and forth that is really good. I think probably one of the best sequences. It's kind of like an extended cut, I guess, where near the final portion of where you have this kind of uprising emerging. Which, by the way, another thing I appreciate is just the up. There's government forces which are just they seem kind of evil. There's also the rebel faction, and they don't really seem all that great either, right? And then you have a few people kind of like caught in the middle that are just kind of like considered more so the moral forces. But anyway, in this kind of like extended sequence of with the uprising, kind of like getting off in that way. There's a point where Theo gets shot. You don't see it happening right away. What you see though is this blood on the lens, and when you see the blood on the lens, which kind of sticks with him for a while, you don't know if that's blood on the lens from him being shot or if the bullet came in because he's around a bunch of different people, whether it hurt someone else and now that's their blood. So now for a while, um, that's kind of like the director's way of communicating this tension of you don't know if this guy's hurt, right? And he's the protagonist, so like him being hurt would be considered a big deal, and you don't know how serious it is, and it being represented just by this kind of like blurry bit of blood on the lens. I thought it was a really, really well done. I can't think of any other example like that when I think about like cinema in general. So I mean, this is what I mean by in terms of like technical greatness. I think stuff like that makes, puts it in an upper echelon for technical ingenuity, even if, I fully concede some of the critiques that we've made on the more kind of like deeper artistic side. But aesthetically, it has all this stuff going for it.
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, the movie has like a lot of really long shots as
Hmm.
well, which is it's not super showy about it. Like this was
Yeah.
something that was talked about the movie back in the day,
Hmm.
but it's not like Russian Ark where like that's the hook. It's like this is the movie with really long shots.
Hmm.
It doesn't especially call attention to itself like in the
Yeah.
moment that it's happening. And
But when you think about it, even like in the car scene when they're passing the ball back and forth, and the fact that they're able to do it right and it doesn't drop, you don't really think about it as it's happening. But when you think back, it's like that must have been pretty fucking difficult. I'm sure that wasn't the first take that they did of that, you know?
yeah, and I wonder if there was like magic trickery to it too, where like that like she's spinning the ball and it traveling is
Hmm.
like a little bit of cinematic wizardry, and then somehow they got the,
Hmm.
like if there is like that element of it as
Yeah.
well. I wouldn't mind if there was, but I just
Yeah. Yeah,
it's
maybe. But
interesting to think about.
and even if it is, I mean, there's plenty of other situations where that's probably not the case, and yet you don't actively think about the difficulty of the shots unless like you think back. Like, yes, it's
Yeah.
not showy, it's not like a dick measuring contest, but it's just pulled off very well.
Well, and even in the beginning of the movie, when he steps out of the cafe, there's like this slightly long shot of it sort of like pans around him, and you see that he's like on this street in London,
Hmm.
and then it shows him going over to like a power box or something like that. And he puts the coffee down, he starts pouring bourbon into it. And then it sort of pans around to the other side, and you see this like, and I can't remember if there's a cut in there or not, but you see this explosion rock this coffee shop that he had just been standing inside like
Hmm.
moments before.
Hmm.
So that's a really, because I imagine that that has to have been, I mean, it's very expensive to film in any major metropolitan area, to like
Hmm.
shut the streets down and get the filming permits to fill it with extras and stuff like that. So that is a really, there's only really like a couple of shots like inside of London proper where it's like really big and wide, and you see like these, big wide city streets. So, but it's done in such a way that it sort of gives it a bigger feeling than probably like in production wise it actually required.
Hmm.
There is the sense in which it's like doing a lot to evoke the space that all of this action is happening in, with very
Hmm.
clever like camera tricks and
Yeah.
sound and things of that nature.
Yeah. So maybe we could just finish up then with some of these quotes. Um, uh, so the film does not explain the cause of the infertility, although environmental destruction and divine punishment are considered. Cuaron has attributed this unanswered question and others in the film to his dislike for the purely expositorial film. Quote, there's a kind of cinema I detest, which is a cinema that is about exposition and explanations. It's become now what I call a medium for lazy readers. Cinema is a hostage of narrative, and I'm very good at narrative as a hostage of cinema. What do you think about that?
Uh, on the one hand, I appreciate where he's coming from, but on the other
Mhm.
hand, it does make me think like, well, that's probably why like the plot is not
Yeah,
fantastic.
exactly. Yeah,
But
exactly. Yeah. I was thinking it's a very, it's a very self-serving statement in a way where, I nonetheless appreciate it because if this is his mentality, I guess it's similar to like some of like Nabokov's commentary about, philosophical import of a work versus kind of like pure technical, whatever. And that allows for a lot of stupidity to make into Nabokov's works. And in this
Mhm.
case, it allows him to be, so technically adept and memorable in this way, but also it's kind of an excuse to not deal with kind of like a fundamental thing. And I mean, we mentioned some of these like more fundamental issues which exist even if we concede all these other
Yeah.
positives as well. And I wonder, like, he would probably hate something like the films of John Sayles. Um, Even though like I haven't seen any other films of his, but it wouldn't surprise me if overall John Sayles is a greater filmmaker
Oh,
than
he
him.
definitely is. I promise you that. But
Yeah. You've seen his other films, like what like is this his only like really good one or what?
let's see. Well, he made the movie Y tu mamá también, which
Yeah, I haven't
I
seen.
if I saw it, I don't remember anything from it, but
Hmm.
I know our mutual friend Dan is ripped that movie a new
Hmm.
asshole when he saw it,
Hmm.
so he was not happy with it. He made the third Harry Potter movie, Harry Potter and the
Hmm.
Prisoner of Azkaban, which I is probably the only one that is like aesthetically good,
Hmm.
but just kind of
And if
goes where his head
I
is.
haven't
But
seen it, but like that would be a perfect encapsulation of this philosophy that he's explaining here, you know?
well, the thing he did that was nice that the other, because the other, especially the previous two movies were so focused on being faithful adaptations of the books.
Hmm.
Whereas in this, he tried to give the world like a more of a lived-in sense, like
Hmm.
he included details about magic and using magic that were not necessarily lifted straight from the book, but were to give it a sense of like, oh, this is what little boys with magic would do. They would, give each other a frog that the other one didn't. I can't remember exactly what it is, but just little things like that. And then I'm gonna look this up, but if I'm not mistaken, he made the movie Gravity, which is a huge fucking piece of shit. But
Yeah, so
uh,
I mean, this is a very dangerous philosophy, and I say this as somebody that my own filmmaking now, I am very focused on cinematography. I mean, in fact, like me and Joel, we do our own cinematography. It's not as if we get anybody else to do the cameras or to design the shots. We literally just do it like that. So again, like yeah, I appreciate where he's coming from, but we're gonna need something more than that, baby.
yeah, yeah, he did make Gravity, which is a really bad movie. And then he made a movie called Roma, which was, I think, Netflix's first big attempt at like, oh, we're gunning for an Oscar. And
Mm,
I mostly found that movie boring.
hmm
There's a couple nice shots,
mm,
but I just remember thinking that it was like pretty dull and not the best realized in terms of the narrative. So kind
yeah.
of kind of a through line that he's very attentive to the technical aspects of cinema. I mean, Gravity, I didn't see it in theaters, but I'm sure it was like marvelous to as a bit of spectacle to watch in the theaters. But the story in that, I mean, the story in that movie is bad. The one in this is just like very, but
hmm
that one is just like Sandra Bullock and George Clooney floating around in space, and Sandra Bullock looks scared, and George Clooney is annoying. So I mean, that's kind of the just like rambling on and telling folksy little tales and whatnot. So.
hmm
Yeah, very, yeah, not a, yeah, but yeah, I agree with you. It's not a good because I don't know what this thing is in cinema where it's like they have this like shame about the fact that it's like a narrative medium. It's like, well, yeah, it's like, oh, we're just like derivative of books, and so we have to
hmm
run in the direction of like, well, what can we do that no other medium can do? And I do appreciate that,
hmm
compared to the movie, a rich lived-in world that I also think it's not, but it's a much worse movie, I would say. Like Blade Runner, there are these like long passages where there's like nothing happening other than just the camera focusing on like the science fiction facade as the car flies through the
hmm
city or something like that. And when the studios got a hold of that, they put a narration over it read by Harrison Ford, and everyone's like, "Oh, the narration ruins it." It's like, no, I mean, like it was badly done because Harrison Ford didn't give a shit about it because it
hmm
wasn't like Ridley Scott's vision. But there should have been narration. Like there should have been neo-noir narration
hmm
over the long passages of fucking nothing that is happening in this movie. This movie, Children of Men, is much cleverer in that there is at least always something like the world building is superimposed over stuff happening. It's more like the movie Alien in that regard, where like there is like this lived-in feeling world that you're experiencing, but it doesn't take the time to like explain it to you with these like long empty shots of nothing happening. It's
hmm
like it sort of trusts that you will pick it up amidst everything else that is happening.
Yeah, yeah. This fear of being derivative of novels, or let's say the written word more broadly. Yeah, like I do understand where they're coming from, but to me, it is such a not only is it dangerous, but it's very restrictive. It is very self-restrictive in the sense that I mean, like, look, I think it's not. I don't think it's very common for people to be in the kind of trajectory that I found myself on. I mean, I started with literature, multiple types, whether it's like poetry or, novels, writing essays. I went from, pure kind of fictional type stuff to very analytical, technical writing. And then suddenly I found myself like doing photography and filmmaking where like it's literally, we're doing everything our own, like the audio, the photography, the cinematography, the scripting, like everything. And that is all coming from the written word. That is all downstream of my ability to verbalize how something works. If I can put into words, if I can conceptually understand it in this kind of way that only language can do, then anything else is possible. And I think if people kind of understand, like if they could use the written word as the blueprint for a grander scheme of things, then there's nothing to fear. You could do all things very well, but it would have been impossible for me to do the various things that I do without having that foundation of the like that's literally everything, right? And to this day now, like even if I'm doing films, like right now, like after we do this show, I'm gonna do whatever, and I'm gonna spend like an hour like writing poetry because I feel like I have to. You can't I can't ever lose that. That allows anything else to happen in my life. like literally anything else, even like relationships in some way. Like do not be scared of verbalizations. Do not be scared of articulating things. Do not be scared of being restricted by it. It doesn't have to be that way. So very, very dangerous philosophy on his part. Doesn't have to be dangerous, but it just tends towards that direction, I think.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's also just kind of a because in addition to being self-restrictive, it can also be like kind of self-indulgent too.
Hmm.
It's like I don't have to justify why it is that I'm doing this.
Hmm.
It's my vision or whatever. And
Hmm.
I gotta find the healthy balance. I mean, I think most people would agree like that the scene in the movie Balthazar where the donkey is taken into the circus and it makes eye contact with all of the other animals and
Hmm.
there's just this sense of like, dude, you get ready, man, get ready.
Hmm.
So that is there is power in the sort of like wordless, imagistically driven
Hmm.
aspects of cinema, but you can't force that either. That's
Hmm.
kind of that's going to happen when it happens. It
Hmm.
can't be just your guiding philosophy because then I don't know, you do the thing a lot of lazy artists do where it's like, well, I made it, you put it together, you make sense of it. It's like the artist has to do some of the work of like piecing it together in a way that makes it coherent. I'm not saying this movie in particular is
Hmm.
incoherent, just that as a philosophy is like a little bit self-serving.
Hmm.
It's like, oh, it's not that the narrative is cliche, it's that I'm doing something bigger and more important than the narrative. And it's like,
Hmm.
well, I mean, in the case of this movie, kind of, sorta,
Hmm.
but not every movie is this movie,
Yeah.
so
Well, I think we could leave it at that. This has been Artifact 66. We're back at it. We're back to film analysis with new eyes, right? Fresh eyes on my part. And well, I mean, I think we have fresh eyes every single day, every single time that you wake up. You better have fresh eyes because what's the point of living otherwise? Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you again soon.